Hi, everyone, and welcome to Higher Perspectives. Today, I would like to talk about what I call youth with new capacities. These are children that have been diagnosed as learning disordered, autistic, neurodiverse, all manner of really pathological diagnoses or labels, and talk about what's happening here with this phenomenon and who are these children, what are the energetics behind it, and what's happening and where are we going with that. I suppose that I'm most interested in this because I would say that I'm probably one of these children with new capacities. My ability to read energy has been with me since I was a child and has been, I've worked very hard to develop it over time to be more coherent, to be more useful, boots on the ground, so that it really made a positive difference in whatever domain I found myself in, and particularly in my case, leadership, business, and it turns out that leaders, when I have done over 12,000 readings, and in one of those soul level readings, I found that the leaders of companies started to get anxious because of their children. And as this phenomenon kept going and I saw that it was happening, I began to research it. I created a DVD on the misdiagnosis of gifted children, researching that book by Jim Webb and others, talking to pediatric neuropsychologists and psychiatrists to find out what their take on this was, and going to conferences of psychic children to learn about how they were being gathered and what I could learn from just filming them, talking with them. So I did my research on them, and myself having many of these capacities, I began to see that these children had, let's say that the every generation, we have a new level of energy on the planet. We have a higher vibration as people contribute more and more to the quantum field. And I call the quantum field that which is all that is, right? And every generation should be smarter than the one before, and our brain capacities should be expanding and evolving with each one. And it turns out that we have now, let's say, expanded to the point where these children with very high capacities for creativity, certain kinds of intelligences, and abstract thinking are at an all-time high. And I see that when I found out that the leaders I was working with in companies were worried about their children, and I began to research it, I realized that there was some interesting information out there. PMH Atwater has written 30 plus books as a researcher, and she's been researching near-death experiences in children. And she also began to understand that this phenomenon was happening with children and wrote a book. It was called The Children of the Fifth World, A Guide to the Coming Changes in Human Consciousness. And one of the things she said in 2010, that she said in 2020, the biggest the most prominent issue you'll find for these children will be identity. And at the time, it was like, what does that even mean? And of course, now we have, the LGBTQ plus community talking to us about that every day, and what that means to them, and what that brings to their the contribution that they have, and the way they feel about themselves in the world. And so I have been looking at this for a very long time. I did at a conference or two, I've done talks on multisensory children and how they can effectively operate their energetic system so they can access their wisdom more quickly, and they can self-regulate or self-balance. And once one understands intuitive intelligence at a higher level, that is possible. The next level of intuitive intelligence is to be able to heal oneself through energetic focus within. And finally, to what I call entangle in the quantum field, which is actually to facilitate healing for others, which is what I do remotely worldwide with my clients. So when I began to look at what was going on with these children, I realized that the paradigm that has been holding them, I've talked about in other presentations on YouTube, is that this paradigm that makes us feel safe as parents, that makes us feel that our children are safe, is not the same paradigm in which they feel safe. And what's been happening is, if you think of a person as a system, and we have stimuli, and then we have receptor sites for that stimuli. And those receptor sites are both five senses, tasting, touching, hearing, feeling, seeing. And then they're also energetic. I might be looking at something through the view of my my intuitive intelligence of the third eye. And that is a function that can see horizontally. This is why people know the future, right? They predict the future. They can see it horizontally through this function. It's also something that when it is a gift and it's not understood as a gift, the person that has that and is perceiving all the stimuli through the portal of this gift will see everything in images simultaneously and without any emotions attached to it. The emotion that gets attached to it is when the stimuli gets overwhelming, because you and I are looking at something perhaps and saying, oh, I see this or I see that. And someone else is looking at it and they're seeing energetic things there and in the future and in the present. And as we know from particle physics, there's at least 7-dimensional realities happening simultaneously. These children can tune into them with their gifts. And so they begin to gather this intelligence, but instead of intelligence, it's just overwhelming data. And what happens is they don't have the frontal cerebral cortex is not engaged. They can't process that information in a higher level way. And so they go into fight or flight. It becomes overwhelming to their system and they act out of that experience. And then, and then in some cases, we just give them drugs so they'll stop behaving that way. But what we haven't done is considered, one, the environment that they're in or how that impacts them, or two, the kind of receptor sites they're using in order to perceive that stimuli. So for example, some children are, it's called clairsentience, empathic, right? They can feel everybody's feelings. And when parents come in and they're upset, but they say, everything's fine, the child is not tuning into everything's fine. They're tuning into the truth of the feelings that their parents have. And then they begin to think that there's some entanglement that happens, because if my sadness feels like your sadness, whose sadness is it? If your anger feels like my anger, whose anger is it? The challenge of that empathy is healthy boundaries. That's why caregivers are often so overwhelmed emotionally and they get very tired very quickly. There are ways to teach children about healthy boundaries, energetic healthy boundaries, so that they don't take in that stimuli. They're at choice for it, right? That they have to know they have agency with when they look at stimuli all around them. What is it that they're taking in? What's the quality of that experience for them? And what do they want to choose so that their system is in a balance and dynamic balance as much as possible? Anything from what they're eating to what they're watching to what their social media is shoveling into their to their brains and to these receptor sites, to what they experience in their environment. So the dynamics of their family and their communities. So all of those layers that have gotten more and more intense in the last 30 years, as we all know, those children are coping with them. And this is the reason they come in more sensitive with greater intuitive capacities and greater intellectual capacities. And their portals, their receptor sites are flooded with data that then they can't process. It's just overwhelming. There's a reason why suicide is one of the top reasons that children between the ages of 10 and 24. And why is that? Because when stimulus is, you don't even know you have a choice, then all you feel all the time is overwhelmed. And if you're an empath, for example, you're always overwhelmed with feelings that are not yours, as well as feelings you can anticipate in a whole room of people or that you feel in the room of people. So you don't want to go in that room. The sensitivities kinesthetically, when children have problems feeling the fabric or the tag on their back, the kinesthetic sensitivities. So these sensitivities are part of a different frequency that someone is accommodating. In other words, we all have a frequency. Ultraviolet light has a frequency. No, we can't see it, feel it. Our 5 senses can't detect it, but we know it exists, right? It's a frequency beyond the one we might call physicalized. And then we all have physicalized frequency, right? Because we see each other. We've all agreed that this is the frequency of physicalized. Well, these children are vibrating at a frequency sometimes outside their outside the frequency of physicalized. And to tell you an example, I talked with one young man who was autistic, labeled autistic. He could not speak. And when I looked at his when I looked at his energy field, he was vibrating at a frequency that was well beyond his body, where all of his energetic fields were merged. And so he couldn't make any distinctions. And I would see him banging on things. He's very intellectual. He could understand what people were saying, but he couldn't communicate, as many people do. He communicates through a keyboard with help, but he is banging on things. And I realized that to touch something and bang on it is the closest thing that someone who's not in their body, vibrating at the frequency that accommodates a body, can use to experience boundaries. And he said, no, it's what I really was doing was wanting my weights on my hands. He has weights on his hands that they put on and helps regulate. Well, why? Because weights are another substitute for boundaries. So some of the ways that these children are vibrating, their frequency is vibrating, is not accommodating their body. But there are ways to develop that partnership with the body if we have the developmental pathway in mind to do that. If we simply say, these children are not safe because they're not like us, and here's some drugs that'll make them more like us, and now we feel safe, they don't, because it didn't change the capacities they have to perceive data. All it did was dull the awareness that they're taking in all that data, right? That does not help them in the long term. It might help relieve some anxiety in the short term, but it's only with the understanding and the development of the intuitive intelligence for these children that they can then feel at choice for what they're taking in, why they're doing that, how they process information, and then they have also some alternatives in how to express it. And they also understand how adults might interpret the ways that they express what they experience internally when they take in that stimuli and try to sort through it without the cerebral cortex to help them do that. So we can see that these children have many challenges, but they're also representative of the world that's coming. As we move up in the frequencies, we move up in consciousness. It will be able, these children will be, let's say, more fit for that world than for this one, and they might be called leaders of the next world. So, why are they here? They're here because, again, we're moving towards the paradigm of unity. And you might even say, with all of these LGBTQ, the identity questions that they have, that the real request from that community is, does it really matter what we call ourselves? Can we each be who we are and still be one world, still be one community, one global community? That's unity, that we each have our individual and unique value, and we all appreciate the diversity in a world that's still all of us together. So that's in energetic terms, and from a mystic perspective, that's where we're going, and that's where they're leading us. And secondly, they have the capacity to begin to address the complex global issues that all of us are dealing with now and will be for some time. These children I met a 6-year-old who was obsessed with creating models of worlds where the cities were floating in water. He couldn't help himself. I've met young ladies and young women who are so focused on engineering that when they see a device, and whether it's a sound device or a speaker or whatever, they have to go explore it, take it apart, put it together. And they have this intense intelligence in very specific areas. And guess what? We need all of those. Have you noticed what's going on with climate? We need a kind of intelligence that only comes with these very specific ways that they focus. And because they can't focus in other ways, instead of pathologizing them, instead of saying, this is a problem because you're not in this paradigm, it's, how do we create an environment that welcomes and supports your particular capacity for taking in stimuli, for making meaning out of it, and for contributing into the larger world? which again is part of why you came, and it's your purpose, right? That's your purpose. So if we honor every single child as a youth with new capacities, the question is not what's wrong with them. The question is, how do we create an environment that welcomes them and that helps develop their capacities in a way that's understandable to them, that's friendly to them, that supports their self-esteem, and that doesn't pit them against children of other intelligences, and make some evaluation about that. We're getting to the point where many times these comparisons are irrelevant. We don't need to be like each other. We all need to learn certain things in common, but it doesn't mean we have to all pit ourselves against each other, which is done endlessly in our society. And if you look at any of Sir Ken Robinson's Changing Paradigm of Education and how drugs are given out to children, and the ways that the pattern shows up, in certain states there's a lot more, and in other states there's less, and here it goes across the country. And he likens it to when children got their tonsils taken out whenever they got a sore throat, that it really isn't about a diagnosis, it's about a trend. And we need to stop looking at how to, again, fit children into a paradigm that's 100 years old in education. And we need to begin to respect. That's why so many children now are being homeschooled more than ever before, until the, one-room schoolhouses way back when. But when, the parents are recognizing that the children have capacities that have to be honored and that cannot be honored in the structure and infrastructure we call education today. And education has been using that feminine, innovative energy to take what has been and to begin to adapt it. And of course, how have we done it? First, it's regulation and it's legal, and we're going to band-aid it, and we're going to say, well, he gets to have more time on a test that he probably shouldn't be taking because it's not presented in a way that's accommodating his intelligence, but that's okay. We'll band-aid that onto that system, until at some point the parents say, we're just taking him out of the entire system because it's not serving. It's not serving. So we have exhausted teachers who are trying to accommodate an old system and try to accommodate all the things that are new that really don't have any developmental pathways already put together, or they don't have ways to accommodate when a child is not regulating their energy in their body, and there's consequences for that, both for the teacher and the child themselves. And so we have to rethink education entirely. Many people have been doing this right now. Many people have been in the last, say, 10 years, particularly. There's been a rethink on how can we support those who are, by the way, we're all neurodiverse. Everyone is different from someone else in your intelligence, in your gifts, and what you can do and what you can't do, and your limitations. No one is the same. So every one of us is neurodiverse, but the children they label neurodiverse are often incredibly intelligent in one area and are limited in others. Again, we could say all of us are like that, and perhaps all of us needed a new system, a Montessori, Steiner-like system, but that also honors these kinds of differences. So this phenomenon has been going on for about 30 years. These children are vibrating at a frequency that's beyond their body's ability to house it and accommodate it appropriately sometimes. The children, what do they need? They need developmental pathways that are not pathologized, that are not based on religion, demonizing them or calling them a pathology, but rather, if this is the new youth, and they are here, why? To get involved and to help us solve our complex global challenges, then we'd better get busy creating these developmental pathways, honoring who they are, and bringing them to understand in themselves that they're here as pioneers, creating pathways for those behind them, and that their contribution counts. So that's what I have to say from a mystic standpoint. These are our future business leaders. So if you've enjoyed the hearing about the new youth and new capacities, and like this channel, please subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.